The morning sun was barely peeking through my kitchen window when I heard the sharp knock on my door. It was 6:15 in the morning on a Saturday, my only day off this week, and someone was already disrupting what I had hoped would be a peaceful morning with coffee and silence. I shuffled to the door in my pajamas, my hair still tangled from sleep, expecting maybe a package delivery or a neighbor with an emergency. Instead, I found Barbara Mitchell standing on my doorstep, dressed as if she were heading to a country club board meeting, rather than making house calls at dawn. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup immaculate, and she wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. In her perfectly manicured hands, she clutched a clipboard and what appeared to be a thick stack of documents. Barbara Mitchell was the president of our homeowners association, a position she had held with an iron fist for the past 8 years. She was known throughout Meadowbrook Estates as someone who took the HOA rules very seriously, perhaps too seriously. Every blade of grass, every mailbox, every paint color had to meet her exacting standards. She had cited neighbors for leaving their garbage cans out 30 minutes past the designated time, for planting flowers she deemed inappropriate, for parking their cars facing the wrong direction in their own driveways. I had managed to avoid her scrutiny for the most part during my 3 years living here. I kept my lawn trimmed, my house painted in approved colors, and generally minded my own business. But clearly, my luck had run out. "Good morning, Detective Rodriguez," Barbara said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I hope I am not disturbing you, but we have some urgent matters to discuss regarding your property. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and yes, I am a detective with the county police department. I have been on the force for 12 years, working my way up from patrol officer to my current position in the Criminal Investigations Division. My job involves solving complex cases, interrogating suspects, and maintaining law and order in our community. It does not, however, involve dealing with HOA drama at 6 in the morning on my day off." "Barbara, it is 6:15 in the morning," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Whatever this is about, can it wait until a reasonable hour?" "I am afraid not," she replied, her voice saccharine sweet, but with an edge of steel underneath. "You see, there have been multiple violations observed at your property, and as HOA president, it is my duty to address these immediately. We have standards to maintain in Meadowbrook Estates." She thrust the clipboard toward me, and I reluctantly took it, scanning the documents attached. What I saw made my blood pressure rise. The list was 3 pages long, single-spaced, detailing supposed violations that ranged from absurd to completely fabricated. According to Barbara's meticulous documentation, my mailbox was 0.3 inches too far to the left from the approved position. My front porch light was allegedly 7 watts brighter than permitted. My gardenose, which I had coiled neatly beside my house, was visible from the street at a certain angle and therefore constituted an aesthetic violation. There were complaints about my car being parked in my driveway overnight, even though there was no rule prohibiting that. She had even cited me for having a welcome mat that was the wrong shade of brown. The most ridiculous claim was that my house number plaque was installed at an angle of 89.7 degrees, instead of the required 90 degrees, making it somehow not perfectly vertical. I wondered if she had actually brought a protractor to measure it. "Barbara, most of these are not even real violations," I said, handing the clipboard back to her. "And the ones that might be are so minor that they do not warrant this kind of harassment. I have reviewed the HOA bylaws, and nothing I have done violates them." "I am afraid you are mistaken," she said, her smile becoming even more forced. "As HOA president, I have the authority to interpret the bylaws, and I have determined that your property is in violation. You have 14 days to remedy these issues, or you will face fines, substantial fines, starting at $500 per violation per day." I did the math quickly in my head. With over 20 violations listed, if she actually tried to enforce these fines, I could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in penalties. It was extortion, plain and simple, disguised as HOA enforcement. "We will see about that," Primera Said firmly. "I will be contacting a lawyer, and we can discuss this through proper legal channels." Barbara's expression shifted from fake pleasantness to open hostility. "You can hire all the lawyers you want. Detective, the HOA has legal representation too, and we have successfully defended our enforcement actions many times. I suggest you save yourself the trouble and the expense and simply comply with the rules like everyone else." With that, she turned on her designer heels and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway, furious and bewildered. This was not how I had planned to spend my Saturday morning. Over the next few days, I learned that I was not Barbara's only target. I spoke with several neighbors who had received similar violation notices, all of them equally bogus. Mrs. Chun down the street had been cited for her rose bushes being 2 inches taller than the maximum allowed height. The Johnsons were facing fines because their son's basketball hoop was allegedly creating noise disturbances, even though the kid only played during the afternoon. Even old Mr. Patterson, who was 87 years old and had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, received a citation because his lawn had a few dandelions. What made it worse was that Barbara seemed to be exempt from her own rules. Her property, which sat on the largest lot in the development, had several features that would have violated the very bylaws she was enforcing. Her fence was taller than the permitted 6 feet. She had installed decorative lighting that was far brighter than what she allowed others. Her multiple vehicles, including a luxury sedan and a sports car, were often parked in ways that blocked sidewalks. I started doing what I do best: investigating. As a detective, I had learned to look beneath the surface, to find patterns, to follow paper trails. I began by requesting copies of all HOA financial records, which as a homeowner I had a legal right to see. Barbara tried to delay and obstruct my requests, but I was persistent. When the documents finally arrived, they were heavily redacted and incomplete, which only made me more suspicious. I also started talking to more neighbors, building a case against Barbara's harassment tactics. I discovered that over the past 2 years, she had issued violation notices to over 60% of the households in Meadowbrook Estates. Many had simply paid the fines rather than fight them, not wanting the hassle. Others had been forced to make expensive and unnecessary modifications to their properties. One family had even sold their home and moved away because they could not afford the mounting penalties. The more I investigated, the more I realized this was not just about power-hungry HOA enforcement. There was something else going on, something that involved money and corruption. I just had to find the proof. Then came the second confrontation. Exactly 13 days after Barbara's initial visit, she appeared at my door again, this time at 7 in the evening, accompanied by 2 people she introduced as HOA board members. One was a nervous-looking man named Gerald, who barely made eye contact. The other was a woman named Patricia, who seemed uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Detective Rodriguez, we are here to conduct an inspection of your property," Barbara announced. "Your 14-day grace period is almost up, and we need to verify whether you have addressed the violations. You do not have permission to inspect my property," Primetta Saeed firmly. "And I have not made any changes because, as Primetta told you, there were no legitimate violations to address. I have consulted with an attorney, and we are prepared to challenge every single one of your claims." Barbara's face reddened. "Then, as of tomorrow, you will be in violation and subject to daily fines. I hope you understand the financial consequences of your stubbornness, Detective, and I hope you understand the legal consequences of harassment, extortion, and abuse of authority," I replied evenly, "because that is what we will be discussing in court." Gerald and Patricia exchanged worried glances. It was clear they were uncomfortable with Barbara's aggressive tactics, but felt powerless to oppose her. Barbara, however, seemed unfazed by my threat. "We will see who prevails, Detective," she said coldly, before turning to leave. "The HOA has considerable resources and legal backing. I doubt your detective's salary will be sufficient to wage a prolonged legal battle." That comment struck me as odd. How did she know details about my salary? How much research had she done on me? It suggested a level of personal vendetta that went beyond simple HOA enforcement. After they left, I sat down at my computer and began digging deeper. I used some of my professional resources, being careful to stay within legal bounds, to look into Barbara Mitchell's background. What I found was interesting. She had been involved in 2 previous HOA boards in other states before moving to our area 5 years ago. In both cases, there had been complaints and allegations of financial impropriety, though nothing had resulted in criminal charges. Both times, she had resigned and moved away before investigations could be completed. I also discovered that Barbara's husband, Richard Mitchell, was a real estate developer with business interests throughout the county. He specialized in buying undervalued properties, renovating them, and flipping them for profit. Suddenly, a pattern began to emerge in my mind. What if Barbara's aggressive HOA enforcement was not just about control? What if it was part of a scheme to drive down property values or force homeowners to sell? I shared my suspicions with a few trusted neighbors, and we decided to form a coalition to challenge Barbara's authority. We scheduled a special meeting of all homeowners, bypassing Barbara's control of the regular HOA meetings. According to the bylaws, any 25 homeowners could call for such a meeting, and we had gathered 42 signatures. Barbara was furious when she received the notice. She tried to block the meeting, claiming procedural irregularities, but our lawyer confirmed that everything had been done properly. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, and word spread quickly throughout Meadowbrook Estates. It seemed like everyone had a grievance against Barbara and was eager for the opportunity to voice it. The day before the meeting, Barbara escalated her campaign against me. I came home from work to find a formal legal notice taped to my door. It was a demand for immediate payment of $18,750 in accumulated HOA fines, along with a threat of foreclosure on my property if I did not pay within 72 hours. The notice also claimed I had violated additional rules by failing to maintain my property in pristine condition, even though my house and yard were perfectly fine. I photographed the notice, documented everything, and called my attorney immediately. He assured me that Barbara's threats were legally hollow and that she could not actually foreclose on my property over these fabricated violations. Still, it was clear she was willing to use intimidation and false legal threats to get her way. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Barbara's tactics, her history, her husband's business interests, and the pattern of harassment throughout the neighborhood. There had to be something more here. Something criminal that I could prove. As a detective, I had learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that Barbara Mitchell was involved in something far worse than just being a tyrannical HOA president. I decided to spend my Wednesday doing some field. I took a personal day from the department and began visiting county offices, pulling records on property transactions in Meadowbrook Estates over the past 5 years. What I discovered was shocking. In the past 3 years alone, Barbara's husband had purchased 12 properties in our neighborhood, all of them at prices well below market value. Most of these sales had occurred shortly after the homeowners had received extensive violation notices and fines from the HOA. The pattern was clear. Barbara would target a homeowner with aggressive enforcement, pile on violations and fines, create a hostile environment, and eventually the stressed homeowner would decide to sell. Richard Mitchell's companies would then swoop in with lowball offers, and desperate to escape the HOA nightmare, owners would accept. The properties would be quickly renovated and sold at significant profit. It was a brilliant, if unethical, scheme. Barbara used her position of authority to create artificial pressure on homeowners, essentially using the HOA as a weapon to benefit her family's business interests. I had seen similar corruption cases before, but never in the context of a homeowners association. Now I had a choice to make. I could present this information at the homeowners meeting tomorrow and let the community decide how to proceed. Or I could take my findings to the district attorney's office and push for a criminal investigation. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. With more digging, I was confident I could build a case for fraud, extortion, and abuse of authority. As I organized my research that Wednesday evening, my phone rung. It was Mrs. Chun, one of the neighbors who had been fighting her own battle with Barbara. "Sarah, you need to know something," she said urgently. "I just got a call from Gerald. You know, the board member who came with Barbara to your house? He wants to talk to you privately before tomorrow's meeting. He says he has information about Barbara that you need to hear. He sounds scared." This was interesting. If one of Barbara's own board members was willing to turn against her, it could provide the breakthrough I needed. "Did he say What kind of information? Primera asked. No, but he mentioned something about financial records and fake invoices. He wants to meet you at the coffee shop on Main Street at 8 tomorrow morning. He made me promise not to tell anyone else. Fakin' boy. That suggested financial fraud, possibly embezzlement of HOA funds. If Gerald had documentation of that, combined with what I had already discovered about the property scheme, we would have a solid criminal case. Tell him I will be there, I said. Señora. Chun, thank you for passing this along. This could be exactly what we need. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Barbara Mitchell had made a critical mistake. She had targeted a detective, someone who knew how to investigate, who understood the legal system, and who had the resources and determination to expose corruption. Tomorrow morning's meeting with Gerald could provide the final pieces of the puzzle. And tomorrow night's homeowners meeting would be very different from what Barbara was expecting. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I allowed myself a small smile. Barbara had pushed too hard, harassed too many people, and gotten too confident in her power. She was about to learn a very important lesson. When you abuse your authority, eventually someone will hold you accountable. And in this case, that someone wore a badge. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for both meetings, organizing my evidence, and making sure everything was documented properly. Whatever happened next, I wanted to be ready. Barbara Mitchell's reign of terror over Meadowbrook Estates was about to come to an end, and I was going to be the one to end it. The stage was set. Tomorrow would bring answers, confrontation, and hopefully justice. The Badge I Wore. Part 2. The coffee shop confession Thursday morning arrived with an overcast sky that matched my anxious mood. I was up at 5:30, unable to sleep any longer, my mind racing through possibilities of what Gerald might reveal. I dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, wanting to appear approachable rather than intimidating. The last thing I needed was for Gerald to get spooked and change his mind about talking to me. The Main Street coffee shop was a small, locally owned establishment called the Daily Grind. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, which made me wonder why Gerald had chosen such a public location for what was presumably a sensitive conversation. Perhaps he felt safer in a crowded space, or maybe he wanted witnesses in case something went wrong. I arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early, and ordered a black coffee. I chose a corner booth that offered a clear view of the entrance while providing some privacy from other customers. The morning crowd was just beginning to trickle in. A few construction workers grabbing coffee before heading to job sites, a couple of nurses still in scrubs from the night shift, and several business people in suits checking their phones while waiting for their orders. Gerald arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. He looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he had not slept well in days. He wore wrinkled khaki pants and a polo shirt that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. His hands trembled slightly as he ordered a large coffee with extra shots of espresso. He spotted me in the corner booth and made his way over, glancing nervously around the shop as if expecting Barbara to materialize out of thin air. He slid into the seat across from me, clutching his coffee cup like a lifeline. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not know who else to turn to. Everyone in the neighborhood is either too afraid of Barbara, or they have already given up and moved away. "You are safe here," Gerald, I assured him. "Whatever you tell me will be handled appropriately. But first, I need to understand what you know and what kind of evidence you have." He took a long sip of his coffee, gathering his courage. Then he reached into a worn leather messenger bag and pulled out a thick manila folder stuffed with documents. He pushed it across the table toward me. "This is everything," he said, "or at least everything I could copy without Barbara noticing. Financial records, fake invoices, emails, bank statements. It is all there. She has been embezzling from the HOA for years." I opened the folder carefully, scanning the top documents, What I saw was damning. There were invoices for landscaping services that had never been performed, bills from maintenance companies that did not exist, and purchase orders for supplies that had never been delivered. Each fraudulent invoice had been paid with HOA funds, and the payments had gone to various shell companies. "How long have you known about this?" I asked, looking up at Gerald. He looked ashamed. "About 18 months. I am the HOA treasurer. Or at least I am supposed to be. Barbara handles all the actual financial transactions, and she just has me sign off on the annual reports. Last year, when I was preparing tax documents, I started noticing discrepancies, numbers that did not add up, expenses that seemed excessive. When I asked Barbara about it, she told me I was misunderstanding the accounting and that everything was proper. She said if I kept questioning her competence, she would remove me from the board and make sure I faced violation fines like everyone else. "So you stayed quiet," I said, trying to keep judgment out of my voice. "I know I should have done something sooner," Gerald said miserably, "but I was scared. I have seen what she does to people who cross her, and my wife was sick last year, going through chemotherapy. I could not afford to lose my house or deal with legal battles. I just kept my head down and hoped someone else would figure it out." I nodded, understanding his position even if I did not entirely condone his inaction. Fear is a powerful motivator, and Barbara had clearly cultivated an atmosphere of intimidation throughout the neighborhood. "What changed? Why are you coming forward now?" I asked. "Because she has gone too far," Gerald said, his voice strengthening with conviction. "What she is doing to you and the other neighbors, it is not about enforcing rules anymore. It is about control and money and destroying people's lives. Last week, when she made me come with her to your house, I saw the way she was enjoying your distress. She gets pleasure from intimidating people. That is when I realized I had to do something. My wife finished her treatments, and she is in remission now. Thank God. I cannot keep living with this guilt." I looked through more of the documents. There were bank statements showing transfers from the HOA operating account to various accounts owned by shell companies. I recognized some of the company names from my research on Richard Mitchell's business dealings. This tied everything together. Barbara was not only using the HOA to drive homeowners to sell their properties to her husband at below-market prices, but she was also stealing money directly from the association's funds. According to these records, she has stolen over $325,000 from the HOA in the past 4 years. I said, doing quick calculations in my head. "That is serious money, Gerald. This is not just HOA drama anymore. This is felony embezzlement, fraud, and possibly racketeering if we can prove coordination with her husband's business activities." Gerald nodded. "Today is more." In that folder there are also emails between Barbara and her husband discussing specific properties to target. They have a system. She identifies homeowners who might be vulnerable, older people, single parents, anyone who might crack under pressure. Then she ramps up enforcement against them until they decide to sell. Richard makes an offer through one of his companies, and because the sellers are desperate to escape the HOA nightmare, they accept whatever he offers. They have done this at least 15 times in our neighborhood alone. This was bigger than I had initially thought. It was an organized scheme that had been operating for years, affecting dozens of families and involving hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen money and fraudulent property transactions. "Gerald, this evidence is extremely valuable, but I need to ask you some questions," I said. "How did you obtain these documents?" "We need to make sure everything was acquired legally, so it can be used in court. As HOA treasurer, I have legal access to all financial records," Gerald explained. Barbara tried to limit what I could see, but according to our bylaws, board members have the right to review any HOA documents. I made copies over the past few weeks, a little at a time so she would not notice. The emails I found on the shared HOA computer that Barbara uses for association business. Everything here was obtained through my legitimate role as a board officer. That it was good. It meant the evidence would be admissible in court. As a detective, I knew how critical chain of custody and legal acquisition of evidence was for building a prosecutable case. "Okay, here is what we are going to do," I said, formulating a plan. I am going to take this evidence and review it thoroughly. Then I am going to contact the district attorney's office and present what we have. Given the amount of money involved and the organized nature of the scheme, I am confident they will open a formal criminal investigation. But Gerald, you need to understand something. You will have to testify. You will have to go on record about what you know and what you witnessed. Are you prepared to do that? Gerald swallowed hard, but nodded. Yes, I am ready. I should have done this a year ago. I will testify to whatever is needed. Good. Now, about tonight's homeowners meeting. Barbara does not know you have talked to me, correct? Correct. She thinks I am still under her control. She expects me to support her at the meeting tonight. Perfect. Here is what I want you to do. Act normal. Do not give her any reason to suspect you have turned against her. At the meeting tonight, when the time is right, I will present some of my findings about the property scheme. That is when I want you to stand up and confirm what you know about the financial fraud. The combination of your testimony as a board member and the evidence you have provided will be devastating to her position. Gerald looked nervous, but determined. Primera caene do. That it is time descended. Too many people have been hurt. We finished our coffees and went over a few more details about the evening's strategy. Gerald gave me his phone number and email address, in case I needed to reach him before the meeting. As we were preparing to leave, he paused and looked at me with something like hope in his eyes. Detective Rodriguez, do you really think this will work? Do you think we can actually stop her? We can, I said with confidence. Barbara made the mistake of thinking her position and her intimidation tactics would protect her forever. But the truth always comes out eventually. And tonight, it is coming out in front of the entire neighborhood. We left the coffee shop separately, Gerald departing first, to avoid any appearance that we had met together. I waited 10 minutes before leaving, using the time to make some notes about our conversation and start organizing the evidence he had provided. Back at home, I spent the entire day going through Gerald's documents, page by page. The more I read, the angrier I became. This was not just white-collar crime. It was a systematic exploitation of neighbors and community members. Barbara and her husband had weaponized the turning what should have been a simple neighborhood organization into a tool for theft and intimidation. I made copies of everything, organizing the documents into categories: embezzlement evidence, property scheme documentation, emails showing coordination between Barbara and Richard, and lists of victims. I prepared a presentation for the meeting that would lay out the facts clearly and undeniably. I also called my contact at the district attorney's office, a prosecutor named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in financial crimes. I gave her a brief overview of what I had discovered and asked if she would be interested in reviewing the evidence. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. Sarah, if what you are describing is accurate, this is exactly the kind of case we love to prosecute. Jennifer sighed. Organized fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, embezzlement from a homeowners association. The amounts involved definitely make this a felony case. Send me everything you have, and I will start a preliminary review. If the evidence supports what you are telling me, we can move quickly to open a formal investigation. I spent the next hour scanning and emailing copies of the documents to Jennifer. I kept the originals secure, knowing they would be needed as evidence. By early afternoon, she called me back. Sarah, this is solid. Really solid, Jennifer said. I have reviewed the bank records and the fake invoices, and this is clearly criminal. I am going to brief my supervisor this afternoon, and I expect we will open a formal investigation by tomorrow. We will need to interview your source, this Gerald person, and we will want to bring in forensic accountants to trace all the money flows. This could take some time to fully investigate, but based on what you have given me, I would say Barbara Mitchell is looking at serious prison time if convicted. Hearing those words gave me immense satisfaction. Barbara had gotten away with her schemes for years, but her time was up. As the afternoon turned to evening, I prepared myself mentally for the homeowners' meeting. I knew Barbara would try to control the proceedings, to deflect and intimidate and maintain her power. But tonight would be different. Tonight, she would face accountability. I've dressed in professional clothes, slacks, a blazer, and my detective badge clipped to my belt where it would be visible. I wanted everyone at that meeting to remember that I was not just another frustrated homeowner. I was a law enforcement officer, and I knew how to handle criminals. I gathered my documents, organized them into folders, and loaded everything into my briefcase. I also brought a portable projector and my laptop, planning to show the evidence on the community center screen where everyone could see it clearly. The meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock. I arrived at 6:30 to set up my equipment and claim a prominent position in the room. The community center was a modest building with a large multi-purpose room that could hold about 200 people. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage area where Barbara typically presided over HOA meetings. Other homeowners began arriving early, filling the room with a buzz of anticipation. Word had spread about the special meeting, and people were excited about the possibility of challenging Barbara's authority. I saw familiar faces: Mrs. Chune, the Johnsons, old Mr. Patterson, and dozens of other neighbors who had been victims of Barbara's harassment. Barbara arrived at 6:55, just minutes before the scheduled start time. She walked in like a queen entering her throne room, dressed in another expensive outfit, her expression confident and contemptuous. She was accompanied by Patricia, the other board member, who looked uncomfortable with the large turnout. Gerald arrived separately. Avoiding eye contact with Barbara, he took a seat in the middle section, exactly as we had planned. He would be close enough to stand and speak when needed, but not so prominent as to draw Barbara's suspicion beforehand. At exactly 7 o'clock, Barbara stepped onto the stage and called the meeting to order. Her voice was loud and commanding, projecting authority. I understand that some residents have called this special meeting to discuss concerns about HOA enforcement, she announced. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that the board has a legal obligation to maintain community standards. Our rules exist for everyone's benefit, to protect property values and ensure that Meadowbrook Estates remains a desirable place to live. Any criticism of enforcement must be understood in that context. It was a clever opening, framing any criticism as an attack on the community itself rather than on her abuse of power. But I was ready for her tactics. I stood up from my seat in the front row. Barbara, before you continue, I would like to address this meeting. I believe the residents here tonight deserve to know the truth about what has been happening in this community. Barbara's expression hardened. Detective Rodriguez, this meeting will follow proper procedure. You will have an opportunity to speak when it is your turn. Actually, Barbara, according to the HOA bylaw, the resident who called the meeting has the right to speak first, I replied calmly. And since I was the primary organizer of this special session, I am exercising that right, unless you would like to violate the bylaws you claim to enforce so strictly. There were murmurs of approval from the crowd. Barbara had no choice but to concede, though she did so with obvious reluctance. Very well. Proceed, she said tersely. I walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. The screen lit up with my presentation title: Financial Fraud and Abuse of Authority, an Investigation into HOA Corruption. The room fell completely silent. Barbara's face went pale. The confrontation was about to begin. The Badge I Wore Part 3. The reckoning. The silence in the community center was absolute. Nearly 150 residents sat frozen in their seats, staring at the projection screen where my presentation title glowed accusingly. Barbara Mitchell stood on the stage, her face drained of color, her mouth slightly open in shock. For once, she seemed to have lost her ability to speak. I let the moment stretch, allowing the weight of those words to sink in for everyone in the room. Then I began. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and as many of you know, I am a detective with the County Police Department. Over the past 2 weeks, I have been conducting an investigation into the activities of our HOA president, Barbara Michel, and what I have discovered is deeply disturbing. Tonight, I'm going to present facts, documented evidence, and testimony that will show how Barbara has been systematically defrauding this community for years. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline of property sales in Meadowbrook Estates over the past 4 years. Let me start with something I call the property acquisition scheme. Over the past 4 years, 15 homes in this neighborhood have been sold at significantly below market prices. Every single one of those properties was purchased by companies owned by Richard Mitchell, Barbara's husband. Now, you might ask, what is wrong with that? People sell their homes all the time. But here is where it gets interesting. I clicked again, and the screen showed a chart correlating HOA violation notices with property sales. In every single case, the homeowner received extensive violation notices from Barbara in the months immediately before selling. Not just 1 or 2 violations, but dozens of citations for minor or fabricated infractions. These homeowners were subjected to harassment, threats of fines, and constant intimidation. Eventually, worn down and desperate to escape the hostile environment Barbara created, they sold their homes. And who was there to make an offer? Richard Mitchell's companies, offering prices 20 to 30% below market value. The stressed homeowners, just wanting to be done with the nightmare, accepted these lowball offers. There were gasps and angry murmurs throughout the room. People were beginning to understand the scope of what had been happening. This is slander. Barbara finally found her voice, stepping forward on the stage. These are baseless accusations. My husband is a legitimate businessman, and if he purchased properties in this neighborhood, it was through normal market transactions. You have no proof of any coordination. Actually, Barbara, I do have proof, I replied calmly. I have emails between you and your husband discussing specific properties to target, identifying which homeowners you considered vulnerable, and planning your enforcement strategy to maximize pressure. Would you like me to read some of those emails aloud to everyone here? Barbetta's face went from pale to bright red. Those are private communications. You have no legal right to access them. On the contrary, these emails were sent using the HOA's official computer and email account, which means they are HOA business records. As such, board members have legal access to them. But we will get to that in a moment. First, let me continue with the property scheme. I clicked through several more slides, showing specific examples. The Henderson family, who had sold their beautiful 4-bedroom home for $75,000 less than comparable properties after Barbara, cited them for 42 violations in 3 months. The Ramirez family, elderly retirees, who were driven out after Barbara fined them for their grandchildren's toys being visible in the backyard. The Martinez family, whose teenage daughter had a medical condition, and they needed peace and stability, not constant HOA harassment. Each of these families suffered under Barbara's targeted enforcement. Each of them sold to Richard Mitchell's companies at reduced prices, and each of those properties was then renovated and resold at significant profit. Based on county property records, the Mitchells have made an estimated $800,000 in profit from this scheme. The anger in the room was palpable now. People were whispering to each other, some shouting questions, others looking at Barbara with disgust and betrayal. But wait! It gets worse, I said, raising my voice to be heard over the crowd, because while Barbara was using the HOA as a weapon to benefit her family's business interests, she was also stealing directly from the association's funds. I clicked to a new slide showing financial records. The room fell silent again, everyone leaning forward to see the numbers on the screen. Over the past 4 years, Barbara has embezzled approximately $325,000 from HOA funds through a variety of fraudulent schemes. Fake invoices for landscaping services that were never performed, bills from maintenance companies that do not exist, purchase orders for supplies that were never delivered. All of these fraudulent payments went to shell companies that ultimately trace back to accounts controlled by Barbara or her husband. The crowd erupted. People were shouting, demanding answers, calling for Barbara to be arrested immediately. I raised my hand for quiet. I understand your anger, and it is completely justified. But let me finish presenting the evidence. I want everyone here to understand the full scope of what has been happening. I went through several more slides, showing specific examples of fraudulent invoices, a bill for $12,000 for tree trimming services that were allegedly performed in January 2022, except the company listed on the invoice did not exist and had never been registered with the state. An invoice for $8,000 for parking lot resurfacing in March 2023. Even though our parking lot had never been resurfaced, and showed no signs of recent work. Another bill for $15,000 for pool maintenance over the summer of 2023, despite the fact that our community did not have a pool. These are just a few examples, I explained. There are dozens more. Each fraudulent payment was authorized by Barbara, who, as HOA president, had signing authority over the association's accounts. The money was transferred to various shell companies, which then moved the funds into personal accounts. I have traced these transactions with the help of financial records provided by a member of the HOA board. This was Gerald's cube. He stood up from his seat in the middle section, and all eyes turned to him. Barbara's expression shifted from anger to shock and then to fury as she realized who had betrayed her. "Gerald! What are you doing?" Barbara's voice was shrill with panic. Gerald cleared his throat nervously, but spoke with surprising strength. "I am doing what I should have done 18 months ago when I first noticed the discrepancies in our financial records. I am telling the truth. Everything Detective Rodriguez just presented is accurate. I am the HOA treasurer, and I have access to all of our financial documents. Barbara has been systematically stealing from this association for years. She threatened me when I questioned her about it, told me she would ruin me if I said anything. I was scared, and I stayed silent, and I am ashamed of that. But I cannot stay silent anymore. Too many people have been hurt." The room erupted again. Several people stood up, applauding Gerald for his courage. Others shouted questions at Barbara, demanding explanations. Barbara herself seemed to shrink on the stage, her confident demeanor completely shattered. "You are all fools," Barbara suddenly shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "This neighborhood was nothing before I took over. Property values were stagnant. The common areas were poorly maintained. People did whatever they wanted without any standards. I created order. I made this place desirable. And this is the thanks I get? Accusations from a detective who could not even follow simple HOA rules, and a coward who spent years taking my orders without complaint. You did not create order, Barbara," I said quietly, but firmly. "You created fear. You weaponized your authority to intimidate people and enrich yourself. And now you are going to face the consequences." "There will be no consequences," Barbara snapped. "I have lawyers. I have resources. You cannot prove any of this in court. It is all circumstantial." "Actually, it is not circumstantial at all," I replied. "We have bank records showing the fraudulent transfers. We have the fake invoices with your signature on them. We have emails between you and your husband discussing the property scheme. We have testimony from multiple homeowners about your harassment tactics. And we have Gerald's testimony as HOA treasurer confirming the financial fraud. This morning, I presented all of this evidence to the district attorney's office. They have already opened a formal criminal investigation. A prosecutor named Jennifer Walsh is currently reviewing everything, and I expect they will be filing charges against you within the next few days." Barbara's face went white. For a moment, she seemed unable to breathe. Then she grabbed her purse from the table beside her and rushed toward the exit. "This meeting is over," she shouted as she fled. "You will all hear from my attorneys." Several residents moved to block her path, but I held up my hand. "Let her go," I said. "Running away now does not change anything. The evidence has been submitted to the authorities. Justice will follow its course." The crowd parted, and Barbara fled the community center, leaving behind 4 years of corruption and abuse, finally exposed to the light. After Barbara's dramatic exit, the meeting continued for another hour. People wanted to know what would happen next, how to protect the HOA's remaining funds, and how to repair the damage Barbara had caused. I explained that the district attorney's investigation would take time, but that criminal charges were almost certain. I also recommended that the HOA immediately remove Barbara from her position, freeze all accounts she had access to, and hire an independent auditor to assess the full extent of the financial damage. Mrs. Chun proposed a vote of no confidence in Barbara, which passed unanimously. Patricia, the other board member, apologized for not speaking up sooner and resigned from the board, saying she felt she had failed the community by not challenging Barbara's authority. Gerald agreed to stay on as treasurer to help with the transition and the financial investigation. The residents also voted to elect an interim board to oversee HOA operations until proper elections could be held. I declined to serve on the board, explaining that my role had been to investigate and expose the corruption, not to take on administrative responsibilities. However, I promised to stay involved as needed and to testify in any legal proceedings. As the meeting finally broke up around 10 o'clock that night, many neighbors came up to thank me. Some were emotional, telling me how Barbara's harassment had affected their lives and how relieved they were that it was finally over. Others wanted to share their own stories of abuse and intimidation that they had suffered in silence. Old Mr. Patterson, the 87-year-old, who had received a citation for dandelions in his lawn, shook my hand firmly. "You did a good thing here tonight, Detective," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and the last 4 have been the worst of my life because of that woman. You gave us our community back." As I drove home that night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why I had become a police officer, to protect people and hold the powerful accountable when they abused their authority. Barbara Mitchell had thought she was untouchable, protected by her position and her intimidation tactics. She had been wrong. The next few days were busy. I gave formal statements to the district attorney's office, providing detailed accounts of my investigation and all the evidence I had gathered. Jennifer Walsh kept me updated on the progress of the criminal case. Forensic accountants were brought in to trace all the fraudulent transactions and calculate the exact amount of money that had been stolen. Additional evidence was uncovered, including more fake invoices and additional shell companies used to launder the embezzled funds. On Monday morning, 5 days after the explosive homeowners meeting, I received a call from Jennifer. "Sarah, we are moving forward with charges," she said. "Barbara Mitchell is being charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy. We are also charging Richard Mitchell as a co-conspirator in the property scheme. The total amount of financial loss to victims is estimated at over $1 million when you combine the embezzled HOA funds and the below-market property purchases. Both Barbara and Richard are looking at significant prison time if convicted." "When will the arrests happen?" I asked. "Later today. We have arrest warrants being prepared now. I wanted to give you advance notice, since you were instrumental in building this case. Would you like to be present for the arrests?" I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to be there to see Barbara finally face justice, but another part of me felt like my job was done. I had investigated, gathered evidence, and ensured that the case was handed over to the proper authorities. The rest was up to the legal system. "No, I do not need to be there," I said. "Just let me know when it is done. And thank you, Jennifer, for taking this case seriously and moving so quickly on it." "Thank you for bringing it to us," she replied. "This is exactly the kind of case we need to prosecute. People in positions of authority who abuse that trust need to be held accountable." That afternoon, while I was at my desk at the police station working on an unrelated case, I received a text message from Jennifer. It was simple and direct. "Both in custody, clean arrests. No incidents." I allowed myself a small smile. Barbara Mitchell, the tyrannical HOA president who had terrorized an entire neighborhood for years, was now in custody facing serious criminal charges. The woman who had wielded her authority like a weapon was now going to learn what it meant to be powerless. Word spread quickly through Meadowbrook Estates. By evening, my phone was buzzing with messages from neighbors expressing relief, gratitude, and satisfaction that justice was being served. Someone organized an impromptu celebration at the community center, and although I initially declined to attend, Mrs. Chun convinced me to stop by at least briefly. When I arrived, the room was packed with happy, relieved residents. Someone had brought a cake that said, "Thank you, Detective Rodriguez," and blue frosting. It was touching, if a bit embarrassing. People wanted to toast me, to thank me personally, to share their relief. I accepted their gratitude graciously but tried to redirect credit to Gerald for his courage in coming forward and to all the residents who had supported the investigation. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, Gerald approached me quietly. "Detective Rodriguez, "I want you to know that what you did, it changed everything for me," he said. "I had been living with guilt and fear for so long. You gave me the courage to do the right thing, even when it was hard. I will never forget that." "You did the hard part, Gerald," I replied. "Coming forward with evidence against someone who had power over you takes real courage. You should be proud of what you did." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the whole experience. What had started as a frustrating confrontation over ridiculous HOA violations had turned into a significant criminal investigation. Barbara Mitchell had made the mistake of targeting someone who had the skills and resources to fight back, and that mistake had led to the exposure of her entire corrupt operation. But the case was not over yet. The arrests were just the beginning. There would be court hearings, trials, and a long legal process ahead. And, as I would soon discover, Barbara was not going quietly. She had one final trick up her sleeve, one last desperate attempt to avoid justice. What happened next would test not just my investigative skills, but also my resolve to see this case through to the very end. The Badge I Wore Part 4. The final gambit. 3 weeks had passed since Barbara and Richard Mitchell were arrested. The initial court appearances had been routine: arraignment, bail hearing, and preliminary scheduling. Both had been released on bond, with strict conditions, including surrendering their passports and staying away from Meadowbrook Estates. Their high-powered attorneys had entered not guilty pleas and were already making noise about fighting the charges vigorously. I had returned to my normal routine at the police department, working on other cases, though I remained in close contact with Jennifer Walsh at the district attorney's office. She kept me informed of developments in the case against the Mitchells, and I continued to provide assistance as needed, clarifying evidence and preparing for my eventual testimony. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when everything exploded again. I was at my desk reviewing case files when my supervisor, Lieutenant Marcus Eyes, called me into his office. His expression was serious, almost grim, which immediately put me on alert. "Rodriguez, we need to talk about the Mitchell case," he said, gesturing for me to close the door and sit down. "I just got a very disturbing call from Internal Affairs. Barbara Mitchell has filed a formal complaint against you, alleging that you conducted an illegal investigation, violated her civil rights, and abused your authority as a police officer." I felt my stomach drop. This was Barbara's counterattack, her attempt to discredit me and undermine the case against her. "Lieutenant, everything I did was legal and proper," I said firmly. "I investigated as a private citizen and homeowner, not as a police officer. I did not use any department resources, I did not access any restricted databases, and I did not represent myself as conducting an official police investigation. All of my evidence was obtained legally, either through public records or through documents provided by Gerald Thompson, who, as HOA treasurer, had legal access to them." Lieutenant Hayes nodded. "I believe you, Sarah, but Internal Affairs has to investigate any complaint filed against an officer. You know that they will be conducting interviews, reviewing your actions, and examining the entire timeline of your investigation. The good news is that if you did everything by the book, you will be cleared. The bad news is that this process could take weeks. And in the meantime, Barbara's lawyers will use this complaint to try to get evidence excluded and possibly even get the criminal charges dismissed." "This is exactly what she wants," I said, anger rising in my chest. "She is trying to muddy the waters, to make it seem like the evidence against her was obtained improperly. But it was not. Every step I took was legal." "Ten proveit," Lieutenant Hayes said. "Document everything you did, provide a complete timeline. Show that you acted as a private citizen. Internal Affairs will schedule an interview with you within the next few days. Be prepared to defend every action you took." I left his office, furious but determined. Barbara was trying to turn the tables, to make herself the victim and me the villain. It was a classic defense strategy. When you cannot attack the evidence, attack the person who gathered it. But I had been careful. Deliberately so, knowing that as a police officer my actions would be scrutinized. That evening, I sat down and began documenting everything. I created a detailed timeline of my investigation, noting dates, times, and specific actions. I documented how I had learned about the HOA violations as a homeowner, how I had requested public records, as was my legal right, how I had spoken with neighbors in my capacity as a concerned resident, and how Gerald had voluntarily provided financial documents he had legal access to as HOA treasurer. I also reached out to Jennifer Walsh to inform her of Barbara's complaint. Her reaction was supportive but concerned. "This is a common defense tactic in cases like this," Jennifer explained. "They are hoping to create enough doubt about how the evidence was obtained that a judge might exclude some or all of it. But from everything you have told me and everything I have seen, you acted properly. We will fight this, Sarah. The evidence against Barbara is solid, and her attempt to deflect by attacking you will not work." The Internal Affairs interview was scheduled for Thursday morning, 2 days away. I spent those 2 days preparing, organizing my documentation, and consulting with the police union attorney who would represent me during the interview. He reviewed everything I had done and confirmed that my actions had been appropriate. Thursday morning arrived, and I reported to the Internal Affairs office on the 3rd floor of police headquarters. The interview was conducted by Sergeant Patricia Morrison, a veteran investigator known for being thorough but fair. She was accompanied by another Internal Affairs officer, Detective James Choon, who took notes throughout the interview. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. Sergeant Morrison went through every aspect of my investigation, asking detailed questions about my methods, my motivations, and my use of resources. I answered every question honestly and completely, providing documentation for everything I claimed. "Detective Rodriguez, did you at any time represent yourself as conducting an official police investigation into Barbara Mitchell?" Sergeant Morrison asked. "No, I did not," I replied firmly. "I was investigating as a private citizen who happened to be a homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates. I never used my badge or my position to gain access to information that would not have been available to any other resident. Did you use any department's computers, databases, or resources during your investigation?" "No. All of my research was conducted on my personal computer at home using publicly available information, county property records, state business registration databases, and other public information sources. I did not access any restricted law enforcement databases or use any department resources. The financial documents that were provided to you by Gerald Thompson, did you coerce or pressure him to provide those documents?" "Absolutely not. Gerald contacted me through a mutual neighbor, Mrs. Choon, and voluntarily offered to meet with me. He provided those documents of his own free will because he was troubled by what he had discovered and wanted to do the right thing. As HOA treasurer, he had legal access to all financial records, and he had every right to share them." The interview continued, covering every possible angle. Sergeant Morrison was thorough, but I could tell she was not finding any evidence of wrongdoing on my part. By the end of the interview, her demeanor had softened somewhat. "Detective Rodriguez, based on what you have told me today and the documentation you have provided, it appears that you conducted this investigation appropriately. However, I will need to verify some of your statements, interview other parties, and review additional records before I can complete my investigation. You should expect to hear from me within 2 weeks with a final determination. In the meantime, you ought to continue your regular duties. Do you have any questions?" "No, Sergeant. Thank you for being fair and thorough," I said. As I left the Internal Affairs office, I felt cautiously optimistic. The interview had gone well, and Sergeant Morrison seemed inclined to clear me. But I knew that until the investigation was officially closed, Barbara's lawyers would continue to use the complaint as ammunition in the criminal case. Over the next 10 days, the situation grew more intense. Barbara's attorneys filed multiple motions challenging the evidence, arguing that because I was a police officer, my investigation had violated her Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. They claimed that even though I had acted as a private citizen, my law enforcement training and connections gave me an unfair advantage and made the investigation essentially governmental action. Jennifer Walsh and her team fought back hard, filing detailed responses to each motion. They argued that private citizens, Even those who happen to be police officers have every right to investigate suspected crimes and report them to authorities. They pointed out that all evidence had been obtained legally and that Barbara's attempts to suppress evidence were nothing more than desperate tactics by someone who knew she was guilty. The court scheduled a hearing on the defense motions for late Friday afternoon, 12 days after my internal affairs interview. This hearing would be critical. If the judge sided with Barbara and excluded key evidence, the criminal case could collapse. If the judge sided with the prosecution, the case would move forward to trial. On the morning of the hearing, I received an email from Sergeant Morrison. The subject line read, "Internal Affairs Investigation Concluded." My heart pounded as I opened it. The email was brief but definitive. The Internal Affairs investigation had found no evidence of misconduct on my part. Sergeant Morrison concluded that I had acted appropriately as a private citizen throughout my investigation and that all of my actions had been legal and proper. The complaint filed by Barbara Mitchell was determined to be without merit and was officially dismissed. I immediately forwarded the email to Jennifer Walsh. Her response came within minutes. Perfect timing. I am presenting this at the hearing today. This undermines their entire argument. That afternoon, I sat in the courtroom as the hearing unfolded. Barbara's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Marcus Brentwood, argued passionately that the evidence should be excluded. He portrayed me as an overzealous police officer who had conducted an improper investigation, violating his client's rights in the process. Jennifer Walsh responded with calm precision. She systematically dismantled every argument the defense made, citing case law and legal precedent. Then she presented the Internal Affairs report, showing that even my own department had investigated and cleared me of any wrongdoing. "Your Honor, the defense is attempting to create a legal fiction," Jennifer argued. "They want you to believe that private citizens who happen to be police officers somehow lose their constitutional rights to investigate potential crimes affecting their own property and community. That is not the law." Detective Rodriguez acted as a private homeowner throughout this investigation. She used no governmental resources, accessed no restricted information, and conducted herself entirely within the bounds of the law. The fact that she happens to be trained in investigation does not change that. The evidence was legally obtained and is admissible. Judge Eleanor Harrison, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, listened to both arguments carefully. After brief deliberation, she delivered her ruling. "I have reviewed the defense motions, the prosecution's responses, and the Internal Affairs report. I find that Detective Rodriguez acted appropriately as a private citizen throughout her investigation. The evidence presented demonstrates that she did not use her position as a police officer to gain access to information that would not have been available to any other homeowner. The financial documents were provided voluntarily by an individual who had legal access to them. The property records were public information. The defense's arguments are without merit. All evidence will be admitted. The case will proceed to trial, motion denied." The gavel came down with finality. Barbara, sitting next to her attorney, looked devastated. Her last-ditch attempt to derail the case had failed. The evidence against her would stand, and she would face trial. As we left the courtroom, Jennifer pulled me aside. "This is a huge victory, Sarah. With the evidence intact, we have an extremely strong case. I would not be surprised if Barbara's attorneys start talking about a plea deal soon." Jennifer was right. 2 weeks later, Barbara's attorneys approached the district attorney's office with a plea offer. Barbara was willing to plead guilty to embezzlement and fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Richard was willing to plead guilty to conspiracy charges. In exchange for their guilty pleas, they would provide full restitution to the HOA and 2 affected homeowners, totaling over $1 million. The prosecution accepted the plea deal, but with one condition: significant prison time for both defendants. Barbara was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. Richard received 6 years. Both would be required to pay full restitution and would be permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association or corporate board. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in late November. Nearly 3 months after the night I first received Barbara's ridiculous violation notice, the courtroom was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Estates who wanted to see justice served. When it came time for victims to speak, several people stood up to describe how Barbara's actions had affected their lives. Mrs. Chun talked about the stress and anxiety of facing constant harassment. The Henderson family described how they had lost their home because of Barbara's pressure tactics. Old Mr. Patterson, now 88, spoke about the humiliation and fear he had experienced. I also had the opportunity to address the court. I kept my statement brief, but pointed. Your Honor, as a police officer, I have seen many types of criminals. Some act out of desperation, some out of addiction, some out of momentary poor judgment. But Barbara Mitchell represents something different. She systematically abused a position of trust to enrich herself and to terrorize people who had done nothing wrong. She weaponized authority and used fear as a tool. She did not just steal money. She stole peace of mind, security, and the sense of home that every person deserves. The badge I wear represents my commitment to protect people from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. I am grateful that the justice system has held her accountable. When Judge Harrison delivered the final sentences, Barbara broke down crying. The reality of 8 years in prison had finally hit her. The woman who had once wielded absolute power over an entire neighborhood was now powerless herself, facing years behind bars. After the sentencing, many neighbors approached me outside the courthouse to express their gratitude. There were hugs, tears, and expressions of relief that the ordeal was finally over. In the weeks that followed, Meadowbrook Estates began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, this time with proper oversight and transparency measures in place. The embezzled funds were recovered through the restitution payments, and the association hired an independent management company to handle day-to-day operations. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed dramatically. People felt safe again, free to enjoy their homes without fear of arbitrary harassment. Gerald Thompson was re-elected as treasurer and became a leader in implementing reforms to prevent future abuse. He often thanked me for giving him the courage to come forward, but I always reminded him that he had made the critical decision to do the right thing despite his fear. As for me, I returned to my regular duties at the police department, working cases and serving my community. But the experience with Barbara Mitchell had reminded me why I had become a police officer in the first place: to protect people who could not protect themselves, to hold the powerful accountable, and to ensure that justice prevails even when it requires personal sacrifice and risk. One evening, several months after Barbara began serving her sentence, I was relaxing on my front porch when Mrs. Chun walked over with a plate of homemade cookies. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said, sitting down beside me. "You changed all of our lives. This neighborhood feels like home again." "You all did the hard work of speaking up and supporting each other," I replied. "I just helped shine a light on what was really happening." "No, Sarah. You did more than that. You showed us that standing up to bullies is possible, even when they seem untouchable. You proved that justice can win." As I sat there on my porch, watching the sun set over Meadowbrook Estates, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Barbara Mitchell had tried to use her authority to intimidate and control, but she had made one fatal mistake. She had targeted someone who wore a badge not for power, but for justice. And that badge meant I would never back down from doing what was right, no matter how powerful the opponent or how difficult the fight. The badge I wore was not just a symbol of authority. It was a promise to protect, to serve, and to ensure that no one, no matter their position, was above the law. And that promise had been kept. End.